Secretary will read.
Senate Resolution 694 by Senator Salazar, mourning the death of Marvin E. Mayfield, Jr., dedicated human rights advocate, distinguished citizen, and devoted member of his community.
Senator Salazar on the resolution.
Thank you, Madam President. It is with profound sorrow that today we memorialize the recent passing of Marvin E. Mayfield, Jr., a dear friend, a loving husband, a nurturing father and grandfather whose kindness touched countless lives. Marvin was born on December 15, 1961, in Brooklyn, New York, to the late Reverend Marvin E. Mayfield, Sr. and Louise Frances Mayfield. He attended Edward R. Murrow High School before entering into the United States Air Force. His attendance and graduation from NYU's prison education program inspired him to share his life experiences and hopes for the future. Earning his BA degree in social work from NYU, Marvin also attended the Justice in Education Initiative's Scholars Program of Columbia University. Marvin grew up in the North Brooklyn neighborhoods of Bed-Stuy, Cypress Hills, East New York, and Bushwick, neighborhoods that make up our Senate district today. He was proud of his Brooklyn roots, and he used to chat with me about what it was like there back when he was a kid. Of life in Cypress Hills, Marvin said to me, "It was rough running through those Brooklyn streets, but it was a close-knit community." To me, those words reflect the unconditional, radical love that Marvin had for others. It was his intimate understanding that the strongest communities, those who overcome violence, poverty, and oppression, are the close-knit communities where people feel a collective responsibility for one another. It's easy to allow fear and conflict and strife to define a community. It is much harder in difficult times to focus, as Marvin did, on the bonds that hold our communities together, that can break through cycles of violence and oppression. Marvin was committed to the work of restorative justice, an outspoken advocate for those who've been imprisoned, mistreated, or traumatized. Marvin's personal experiences of criminalization and incarceration drove him to build a movement to change unjust laws and policies. Marvin was a familiar face here in the Capitol. From 2017 to 2019, Marvin helped lead a fight for bail and discovery reform, changing laws in our state to ensure that people could avoid the horrors of pretrial incarceration, allowing them instead to keep their jobs and their homes and take care of their children. Since 2020, Marvin has served as the Director of Organizing at the Center for Community Alternatives, building power with people across New York State who've been impacted by criminalization and community disinvestment. He was integral to envisioning and launching innovative campaigns to help end the injustices of mass incarceration. A truly multi-talented man, Marvin Mayfield was a roller skater, a barber, a tailor, an artist, a singer, tech guru, and self-taught musician. Marvin truly embodied the meaning of fighting ruthlessly against unjust systems, yet always being gracious and kind and compassionate with people. The meaningful way for us to honor Marvin, his memory, and his life's work is to continue his fight for justice. In that spirit, the Center for Community Alternatives is creating the Marvin Mayfield Organizing Fellowship in his honor. To Marvin's beautiful family who are here with us today, thank you for sharing him with us. I miss his warmth and his smile, and I am better for having had the privilege of knowing him. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Brisport on the resolution.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Salazar, for introducing this resolution. Marvin Mayfield Jr. was a proud son of Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and a dedicated civil rights leader whose work touched the lives of people across our great state. His legacy, though, is not only the civil and human rights that he helped win and defend for our people, but also the extraordinary example he set of a life lived in pursuit of a more just future. At a moment in history when the right seems to be clawing back every inch of progress our communities have made, that pursuit can sometimes feel overwhelming. In those moments, I find inspiration in Mayfield because he proved that when faced with even the most terrible darkness, there was always light to be found in coming together with our community. He proved that in uplifting the humanity and dignity of all of our people, collectively, we become far stronger than the sum of our parts. That lesson feels especially important in these final hours of budget negotiations, in which our governor is attempting to roll back some of the very same civil rights that Mayfield fought for. A couple weeks ago, some of us in this room visited Rikers Island, where the overwhelming majority of incarcerated people are simply awaiting a trial. As it is, the conditions on this island are a horrific blight against our state. If bail reform is rolled back, the island and other jails around the state will see their populations explode, with more New Yorkers being held for years on end in even worse conditions without being convicted of a crime. New Yorkers are calling, they are marching, they are protesting, and they are speaking out against this potential future and the governor's attempts to roll back civil rights through the state budget. They are coming together and bringing light into this darkness. I hope that we too can stand with them and carry on the legacy of Marvin Mayfield Jr. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ramos on the resolution.
Thank you, Madam President. Marvin Mayfield has certainly been a fixture here in Albany for the past few years. His voice reverberated through our stone walls. He stood tall and unafraid on the $1 Million Staircase. He came up here from his hometown of Brooklyn because he was called to act. Having experienced the conditions of our jail system and being forever changed by them, he committed himself to ensure that we break the cycles that lock up poor people. Those of us who have been either lucky enough to stand side by side with Marvin as we fight to end the criminalization of poverty, or those of us who have been on the receiving end of his righteous advocacy, were heartbroken to hear of Marvin's passing. Many of us have asked ourselves, what is the best way that we could possibly honor Marvin and his legacy? To me, the first answer is obvious. We must speak clearly and consistently against injustice, to reject fear when it is used as a tool to criminalize people who are a product of their environment. The next answer is to attack the root of the problem. Let's unravel the conditions that even led Marvin to this very personal fight against regressive and racist criminal justice policy. We can honor Marvin by doubling down on the war on poverty. We are looking at a budget that includes a subway fare hike, no action on a plan to keep tenants in their homes, and possibly the codification of poverty wages unless we stop it. Marvin wanted a world where everyone was safe, where everyone had the care and the resources they needed to flourish. With no budget bills before us today, we still have time to honor his memory. I hope he is present in the room with our leaders as they make their final decisions over the next few days. I vote aye on the resolution. Thank you.
Senator Bailey on the resolution.
Thank you, Madam President. You know, Marvin was my constituent, lived in the great city of Co-op City. And he was never shy about, anytime we were on a Zoom or at a presser, saying that he was my constituent, right? That he was from, that he lived there. He always rep Brooklyn, Madam President, but that he lived in my district. That might not seem like a big deal, but to somebody who was a big deal in that space, it meant something. It meant that, because in this space, Madam President, the conversations and negotiations are often complicated and they're often fraught with emotion with impacted individuals who have not seen the light of day for years, who these pieces of legislation that you may think are just statutory language, they are possibly affecting the liberty and life of individuals that we haven't yet gotten a chance to meet. But Marvin Mayfield allowed you to see something that you cannot be defined by what you have gone through, but you will be defined by what you have been after you've gone through it. See, if you looked at Marvin Mayfield just cruising through in his drop top, looking smooth and clean, and if you saw how he carried himself, I don't know if you would think formerly incarcerated individual. But we have to redefine ourselves in thinking that we're all equal. And Marvin showed us that. Marvin was a real one. We had conversations where they were, again, fraught, intense conversations, and he pulled me to the side and he said, I got you. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to work it out. I understand where you're coming from, but you got to understand where we're coming from. And when you have people like Marvin at the table, it means a lot. And he was a member of Woods AME church in my district, right on Edson Avenue. And I remember one time just running into him at their annual street fair. And that was the last place that I expected to see Marvin at. He was a man of faith. He believed in something greater. And I remember seeing him there, and he was like, what are you doing here? I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, this is my district. He's like, well, this is my church. Like, you got it, Marvin. That trumps. As I close, Madam President, I think about his name, and it's strengthened names. Marvin Mayfield. There's an alliteration there. There's a alliterative power there. There's power in the people there, but it's a portmanteau, so to speak, of two of our greatest soul singers, Marvin Gaye and Curtis Mayfield, all in one. Marvin would have told you, Marvin Gaye told us what's going on. And Curtis Mayfield told us about those little child running wild, but Curtis Mayfield also said, move on up. There's a greater day. If you keep on pushing, you'll find a way. Rest in peace to the legend, Marvin Mayfield.
Senator Gianaris on the resolution.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to add my words of condolence to Marvin Mayfield's family and honor him by speaking a little bit about his life and his legacy. As you heard from my colleagues, he was someone who spent a lot of time in this building over the last several years. And what always struck me about Marvin was he was committed to his cause, born of real hard experiences in his own life. But I never saw him when he didn't greet me with a smile. And it was one of those beaming smiles that some people have. But Marvin always lit up the room and then let you know that he wasn't messing around on the issues he was talking about. So he will be sorely missed here. The issues he fought for will not be forgotten. And I know many of us pledge to redouble our efforts to honor his legacy, his experience by carrying on his work. And so I thank Senator Salazar for bringing this resolution to the floor. I thank his family for letting us experience Marvin for these last several years. And I thank you, Madam President, for giving me a moment to speak on this.
Senator Rivera on the resolution.
Thank you, Madam President. As many of my colleagues have said, Marvin was from Brooklyn. But even if he didn't live in the Bronx, we still claim him. And not because it's the Bronx, but because wherever there are folks who need someone to stand up for them, Marvin was there. As has been said by my colleagues, he spent a lot of time in this building. And I spent a lot of time standing right beside him in many of the protests or press conferences that were held up here. And there's a phrase that I've said many times during those press conferences, and that is, I believe in redemption. And I say that phrase in a lot of ways because of what me knowing Marvin inspired. The fact that there are folks who have made mistakes. They have folks who have gone through situations in their life, but they have not given up, and they have continued to live on, and they've made life better for themselves, for their families, for their communities. And Marvin did that right until the end. He was somebody who demonstrated that you can be a relentless fighter, a passionate, relentless fighter, and still do it filled with love. I will miss this brother. He was an incredible part of changing so much of public policy here in the state of New York, and as some of my colleagues have already reminded us, the best way to honor him would be to continue to remember why we made those changes in the first place, and to not succumb to fear, but to embrace love. That's what he would have done. That's what he did right until the end. I will miss my brother. Thank you, Madam President.
To our guests, I welcome you on behalf of the Senate. we extend the privileges and courtesies of this House. Please stand and be recognized. Our condolences. The resolution was previously adopted on April 18th. Senator Gianaris.